Have you ever worn something so meaningful, so sacred to your heart, only to have someone try to tear it apart with a single cruel laugh? Have you ever been mocked for something that carries the weight of your family's legacy, only for that same legacy to rise up and rewrite the entire power structure around you? If a ring forged by your father held the kind of truth that could crumble an entire corporation, would you tell anyone? Or would you wait for the world to expose itself first? Now, I want to tell you my story. Please take a moment, settle in, and listen to what happened to me inside Riverspan. A story of humiliation, hidden power, and a quiet fire that refused to die out. And as you listen, ask yourself honestly, what would you have done if you were in my place? My name is Ayanna Crow. I am 36 years old, born among the red clay winds of northern Arizona, and today I work as a senior data coordinator at Riverspan Analytics, a place that prides itself on precision but thrives on ego. That morning, I sat in the glass conference room sipping coffee that tasted like burnt sage, steadying my breath the same way my father once taught me during long walks through the canyons. I was reviewing quarterly reports when the temperature in the room shifted, not because of the air conditioning, but because Celeste Vale swept in with designer heels that clicked like she owned the ground she walked on. Her eyes caught the bronze ring on my finger, the one my father forged by hand, the one that carried more history than any of us in that room. She stopped, tilted her head, and let her voice carry farther than necessary. "Look at that relic, Ayanna. You cosplaying a frontier peasant today?" A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the room, sharp as flint. I felt the heat rise in my chest like a storm trying to break free, but I swallowed it the way I always had. Silence was a shield I learned early, a shield my father said could cut deeper than anger. She did not know what that ring meant. She did not know that it was the last piece of my father's legacy, a legacy woven with sacrifice, memory, and promises made under starlight. She saw only metal. I carried the weight of a name she could not begin to understand. I could feel resentment coiling inside me like a waiting serpent. Quiet now, but not asleep. What would you have done in that moment? Tell me in the comments. Even as Celeste's laughter lingered in the air like smoke, I kept my eyes on the spreadsheets, though my mind was already drifting far from that conference room. I could almost feel my father's presence the way I used to when we walked the winding ridges behind our home in Arizona, his voice steady and patient as he taught me about humility, resilience, and the kind of strength that did not need to shout to be felt. Most people at Riverspan believed I was just another mid-level employee who blended into the background, someone whose quiet nature meant she had nothing important to say. They never wondered why I wore a handcrafted ring instead of something store-bought, or why I never reacted to the pettiness that circled this place like restless shadows. They had no idea that the man who raised me, Jonas Crow, was not merely a craftsman of metal and memory, but a silent financial architect whose decisions once shifted the fate of entire companies. For nearly a decade, I lived with the simple truth that my father wanted me to stand on my own feet, far away from the influence of his hidden world. Only after he passed did I learn that he had built and controlled the Emberwood Reserve, a confidential emergency fund whispered about in financial circles, but never openly acknowledged. Long before anyone at Riverspan knew my name, that reserve kept the company alive during the collapse of 2008. The ring was his signet, the physical proof of the authority he hoped I would never need to use. I ran my fingers over the warm metal and felt a quiet ache of grief mixed with pride. Celeste's ridicule mattered far less than the truth humming beneath my skin. I knew who I was, even if they did not. And part of me wondered how long it would take before the world inside this building learned it too. The rest of the morning moved slowly, as if time itself was wary of what was coming. I kept my focus on my work, but the weight of my father's ring pressed a little heavier against my hand, reminding me that secrets have their own rhythm and their own moment of awakening. After lunch, the office buzzed with a different kind of energy, a restless hum that usually meant someone important had arrived. Whispers drifted across the floor like wind through tall grass. Silas Rowan, the billionaire whose investments could lift or crush entire sectors, was in the building. Most employees had only seen him in magazines or financial broadcasts. His presence turned the atmosphere sharp and attentive. I stepped into the hallway with a tablet in hand, heading toward the analytics lab, when fate decided to stop me in my tracks. Silas Rowan walked past with his security team flanking him, his expression distant, calculated, but as his gaze swept casually across the corridor, his eyes caught the glint of bronze on my finger. He froze mid-step, his face shifting from neutrality to something far more complex. Recognition, disbelief, maybe even reverence. He approached me with a quiet intensity that made the hallway fall silent. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked, his voice lower than expected, almost cautious. I felt my heartbeat stutter, but I answered with the honesty my father raised me on. It belonged to my father, Jonas Crow. The name struck him like a sudden gust. His shoulders eased, and a shadow of emotion crossed his features, something like gratitude tinged with memory. "Your father saved my entire enterprise," he said slowly, as if he was admitting a truth held close for years. "I owe him more than I could ever repay." In that moment, I realized the world inside Riverspan was about to change, and none of them. Not Celeste, not Marcus, not anyone. Was prepared for what my father's legacy would awaken. Silas Rowan's words echoed in my mind long after he continued down the hallway with his security team. My pulse was still unsteady, not from fear, but from the quiet realization that my father's hidden world was no longer content to stay hidden. The encounter left me with an unfamiliar weight, a sense that something large and unstoppable had begun moving beneath the floor of Riverspan. I went back to my desk, trying to blend into the rhythm of the afternoon, but my thoughts kept circling the look in Silas's eyes. A look reserved for legends, not for daughters who spent their mornings dodging petty insults. When the clock neared 3, the company gathered in the main boardroom for the monumental pitch to Silas himself. This deal had been Marcus Vale's obsession for months, the golden contract he believed would elevate him onto the national stage. Everyone sat straighter when Silas entered, his presence stretching the silence like taut wire. Marcus launched into his rehearsed presentation with theatrical confidence, clicking through slides filled with projections, charts, and inflated promises. Celeste sat near the front, chin lifted, basking in what she believed was her father's inevitable success. But Silas's attention drifted. I saw it. Every few minutes his eyes flicked toward me, tucked in the back row with the analysts. It made Marcus uneasy. His voice cracked slightly as he continued his pitch, unaware that he was already losing the room. Then, mid-sentence, Silas closed his portfolio, stood, and walked directly across the boardroom toward me. Conversation stopped. Pens froze in midair. Marcus blinked like he had misread the entire universe. Silas stopped in front of my chair. His words carried through the room with deliberate clarity. "Are you Ayanna Crow, daughter of Jonas Crow?" I nodded, feeling the air change around us. Silas turned away from Marcus, lifted his leather briefcase, and said, "Then my deal is not with Riverspan, not anymore." And with that, he walked out, leaving a stunned silence so deep it felt like the building itself had forgotten how to breathe. The door had barely closed behind Silas Rowan before the entire boardroom erupted into a frenzy of whispers and frantic motions. Marcus Vale's face drained of color, leaving him looking like a man who had just watched his own future dissolve into dust. Celeste stared at me with wide, bewildered eyes. Her earlier mockery evaporated into something closer to fear than confusion. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, feeling the tremor of 1,000 unspoken truths ripple through the room. I did not gloat. I did not smirk. But deep inside, a quiet storm rolled in my chest, the kind that comes after years of swallowing humiliation. The executives scrambled to understand what had happened, each conversation a desperate attempt to piece together a puzzle they never knew existed. Marcus did not speak to me. He simply rushed out the door, nearly tripping over a chair in his haste. The rest of the day became a blur of speculation and urgent meetings behind closed doors. I could feel the shift in the air as people glanced at me differently, curiosity mixing with unease. Hours later, I saw Marcus barreling toward the basement archives with a look of frantic determination. Something in me knew exactly what he was searching for. My father's shadow. The truth he had never cared to notice. I waited until the halls quieted and followed at a distance. Through the narrow glass window of the archive room, I saw Marcus hunched over old financial binders and digital logs, his hands shaking as he flipped through pages filled with numbers, dates, and signatures. Then he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. His breath caught. And slowly, painfully, he understood. He had found the Emberwood Reserve records. The bailout documents signed by my father. The 22% founding rights he secured when the company had been drowning. The silent power he passed on to me through that handcrafted ring. Marcus pressed both hands to the table, his expression twisted into a realization so heavy it nearly buckled him. I was not just an employee he could mock or dismiss. I was the daughter of the man who had once owned the ground he stood on. And now, he finally knew. Marcus did not come near me for the rest of the day. He moved through the halls like a man walking on thin ice, afraid that even breathing too loudly might shatter what little stability he had left. By the time the sun melted behind the skyline and the office lights dimmed to their nighttime glow, most employees had already left, carrying home their rumors and half-truths. I stayed at my desk, partly because I needed the quiet, and partly because something inside me said the day was not finished yet. My father used to tell me that when change is coming, you can feel it in your bones before it reaches your doorstep. That feeling was humming through me now, steady and certain. It was close to 8 when the front doors opened again. Heavy footsteps echoed across the polished floor, followed by the soft crackle of private earpieces. Silas Rowan had returned, but this time without the performance of a corporate visit. His security team remained at the entrance, allowing him to walk toward me with a deliberate calm that made the empty office feel like sacred ground. He did not greet anyone. He did not ask for permission. He simply stopped at my desk and gave me a nod of respect that carried more weight than any title in this building. "Ayanna," he said, lowering his voice, "your father trusted me with something. He asked me to give it to you only when the moment was right." He reached into his coat and handed me a matte black envelope, sealed with a metallic insignia I had never seen before, an emblem of intertwined lines that resembled both river currents and wildfire paths. The paper felt strangely warm in my hands. Inside was a single item, a vault key card, coded and engraved with coordinates that made my breath catch. Zurich. A private lockbox. My father's name etched beneath the access panel. Silas watched me with a softness I had not expected from a man known for building empires. "Your father's final ledger rests there," he said quietly. "He told me that when you were ready, you would know what to do with it." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of love and responsibility. The world was shifting again, and this time it was not Riverspan's world. It was mine. Silas gave my shoulder a gentle, grounding touch before he stepped back. "Ayanna, your father believed in your strength more than anyone," he said. "Now it is time for the rest of them to see it." As he walked away, the envelope still warm in my hand, I felt a new certainty settle inside me. The story my father began was no longer sleeping in shadows. It was awakening, and I was the one meant to carry it forward. I sat alone in the dim office long after Silas left, the black envelope resting against my palm like a heartbeat that did not belong to me. The building was quiet, almost reverent, as if the walls themselves sensed that something sacred had been set in motion. I turned the keycard over again and again, feeling the etched grooves beneath my fingertips, trying to absorb what it meant. My father had always been a man of few words, but every word he gave carried a greater weight than most people's speeches. He believed in planning for storms long before the clouds gathered, and now, after all these years, I finally understood why. The moment felt too charged for hesitation. I logged into the internal legacy network, the one so old most employees forgot it even existed. It still ran on the original infrastructure from Riverspan's founding years, a system my father once helped rebuild during the economic collapse. The screen flickered with amber light, lines of outdated code appearing like ancient carvings. I typed slowly at first, then with growing certainty, as I entered the sequence of numbers and letters my father had engraved inside the ring's inner band. I'd always thought they were sentimental markings, something symbolic. But they were not symbols. They were instructions. The system hesitated, humming as if waking from a long sleep. Then my father's name flashed across the monitor, followed by a message burned into the root of the company's architecture. Emberwood Protocol recognized, initiating safeguard. I felt the air shift with a quiet, rumbling electricity. A sealed document, locked for over a decade, automatically transmitted to the chairwoman of the board. My father's voice, preserved through text, laid out the terms of the Emberwood Reserve, the protections granted to its heir, and the clause that bound Riverspan's leadership to honor it. No executive, no division head, no vice president could override it. As the final lines processed, I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed not by fear, but by a fierce, aching pride. My father had not only saved this company, he had built a shield strong enough to protect me long after he was gone. The protocol closed with a single sentence, written in his steady, familiar tone. Ayanna, trust your fire. And for the first time in years, I felt that fire rise. Not in anger, but in purpose, steady and unshakable. The world inside Riverspan was about to learn exactly what that fire meant. By the next morning, the Emberwood Protocol had already woven itself quietly through the upper levels of Riverspan's leadership. I did not need to witness the reactions firsthand. The shift in the atmosphere told me everything. Executives who normally walked with stiff pride suddenly moved with cautious glances. Assistants whispered in corners. Even the interns sensed a storm curling above us. I arrived at my workstation with a calm heart, carrying the weight of my father's message like armor. The ring felt warmer today, as if it recognized the path unfolding. Marcus Vale, however, was far from calm. He marched through the office with the frantic energy of a man trying to outrun something that had already caught him. His normally composed face was twisted with desperation, and there was a tremor in his voice each time he barked an order. He did not look at me. Not at first. But when he finally did, the fear behind his eyes was unmistakable. Around mid-morning, he stormed into the analytics department with a printed termination form crushed in his fist. His voice echoed across the open floor. Ayanna Crow, you are dismissed from Riverspan, effective immediately. Your behavior has compromised a critical client relationship, and... He kept talking, but his words blurred under the rush of employees who stood frozen in disbelief. I did not respond. I waited. My father always said that the truth does not need to shout. It reveals itself in its own time. Just as Marcus slammed the form onto my desk, the elevator chimed, the doors opened to reveal the chairwoman of the board, flanked by 2 directors and the company's chief legal officer. Their expressions were carved from stone. Marcus's voice cracked mid-sentence. Ayanna is fired. She. The chairwoman raised a hand, silencing him. Marcus, sit down. Her tone made even the air hesitate. She unfolded a document, one bearing my father's signature and the Riverspan founding seal, and read aloud the clause that Marcus had clearly never bothered to understand. No executive or officer may terminate the designated heir of the Emberwood Reserve. Any attempt to do so constitutes a breach of the Founders' Charter and triggers immediate review of leadership integrity. Marcus paled. Celeste, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped back as though the ground had shifted under her heels. The chairwoman placed the document between us. Ayanna is protected under the Founders' Agreement. Marcus, your attempt to remove her is illegal and void. Silence broke across the office like a wave crashing down. I met Marcus's stare. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with the steady fire my father asked me to trust. The retaliation he thought would destroy me had instead exposed him. And the consequences were just beginning. I followed the chairwoman to the executive floor, my steps steady, my breath calm, as if my father's voice walked beside me. The board waited in the large council room, their faces drawn with the weight of what they had learned in the past 12 hours. But it was the man standing at the head of the table who caught my breath. The founder himself, Harold Brantley, at 68, he still carried the presence of a man who built fortunes with his bare hands and his unshakable will. His silver hair fell past his collar, and his eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, studied me with a familiarity I did not expect. The room quieted as he spoke. "Ayanna Crow," he said, his voice rich with a calm authority. "I have waited a long time to meet you." I bowed my head respectfully. "Sir." He motioned for me to sit, but before the meeting could begin, raised voices echoed from the hallway. The doors burst open. Marcus Vale stumbled inside, with Celeste close behind him, her face blotchy from crying. They were not supposed to be here. Security trailed them, unsure whether to intervene. Marcus pointed at me with a trembling hand. "You are going to ruin everything. She is manipulating the board. This is nonsense. Her father had nothing to do with Riverspan's foundation." Harold Brantley did not shout. He did not show anger. Instead, he reached into a leather-bound folder and lifted a document sealed with the original Riverspan crest. Aged paper, thick ink, and signatures from a time before the company had even become a household name. He placed it gently on the table. "I signed this contract with Jonas Crow," he said. "He saved this company when it was moments from collapse. None of you would be standing here today without him." Celeste shook her head, disbelief twisting her features. "She is lying. It is just a ring." Harold's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You mocked a sacred symbol, and you mocked the daughter of the man who kept this company alive. That insult alone speaks to your character." Marcus's knees seemed to weaken beneath him, but Harold was not done. He slid forward another sheet. Evidence of Marcus's falsified reports, inflated projections, hidden misallocations. "Your failures run deeper than disrespect," Harold said. "You have manipulated numbers, misled investors, and jeopardized the future of Riverspan." He turned to security. "Escort Vice President Marcus Vale and his daughter, Celeste Vale, from this building, effective immediately. Both are terminated from all positions and privileges." Celeste cried out, begging, pulling at her father's arm as security approached. Marcus tried to argue, but every word collapsed beneath the truth displayed on the table. The board turned their eyes away, unable to watch the final unraveling of a legacy built on arrogance. As they were led out, Harold Brantley faced me again, his voice lower, warmer. "Ayanna, your father was a man of honor. Today, you upheld that honor." And for the first time since I had walked into Riverspan, I felt the full weight of my father's legacy settle not as a burden, but as strength. The room remained silent long after Marcus and Celeste were escorted away, the fading echo of their protests dissolving into the weight of what had just taken place. I felt a heaviness in my chest, not from victory, but from the closing of a chapter I had never planned to open. Harold Brantley looked at me with an expression that was both thoughtful and solemn, as if he too was measuring the crossroads we now stood upon. The chairwoman cleared her throat and motioned for me to return to my seat. Every board member watched me with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and something else. Hope, maybe, or guilt. Harold spoke first, fingers steepled under his chin. Ayanna, your father's contract gives you rights that extend beyond simple protection. You are entitled to a permanent executive seat and voting authority. Riverspan was built with your father's hands shaping its survival. We would be honored if you accepted the position he prepared for you. The offer hung in the air like a heavy fog. For a brief moment, I imagined what it would be like to step into that role, to sit at this very table and guide the company my father once saved. But when I pictured the life that came with it, something deep in my chest pulled me backward. My father had been a quiet man, a humble man, and he always warned me that power can twist even the purest intentions if it becomes the goal instead of the responsibility. I understood him now more than ever. I shook my head slowly. I did not come to lead Riverspan, I said softly. I came to see if the company my father saved still understood honor. A few board members lowered their eyes. Words were unnecessary. The truth was already written across their faces. They had failed that test, and they knew it. Before anyone could respond, a message alert chimed on the founder's screen. Silas Rowan had submitted a full withdrawal notice. Every dollar of his investment removed from Riverspan's future accounts. Gasps moved across the room. The board scrambled to process the impact, but Harold Brantley only sighed with quiet understanding. Silas was loyal to your father, he said. He warned us long ago that character matters more than capital. I rose from my seat. My decision was already made. Riverspan will recover, I said, but only if you remember the lessons you forgot. Harold nodded, a bittersweet smile forming at the edges of his expression. You are your father's daughter. He would be proud. I walked out of the council room, past the glass offices, past the whispers, past the ghosts of the choices people here had made. Outside, the evening sun painted the city in amber and gold. I stepped into the open air and let the light settle over me like a blessing. I had not come to claim power. I had come to measure integrity. And their true measure had been revealed. As I left Riverspan behind, I felt no resentment. Only clarity, strength, and the quiet fire my father always told me to trust. If there is one lesson my journey has carved into me, it is this: never underestimate the quiet ones, and never mock what you do not understand. Legacy does not shout. Power does not always wear a title. And the truth, when it rises, can undo years of arrogance in a single breath. My father taught me that fire can burn, but it can also guide, and in the end, every person at Riverspan learned exactly what that fire can reveal. So now I want to hear from you. What part of this story struck you the most? What would you have done if someone mocked your legacy, then tried to erase you? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective might be the next spark someone needs. Let us grow, learn, and rise together.